150,000 subs, Instagram, impacting the church globally.
A few things about me. One is that I have very few friends. No matter what I do, I will put 100% of energy and effort and focus into it. I did not become a youth pastor because I didn't believe I had the relational bandwidth to do the job well. We have 3,000 churches that host their website on our software. Social media affords our churches the ability to reach people in ways that would have been previously unimaginable in human history. You will overestimate what you can do in 1 year and underestimate what you can do in 10 years. Until 10 years I've waited, and I got a lot to say.
Well, hey, we are here on episode number 2 or 3. I'm not sure yet, but it is a brand new show called Help Me See. And I'm so excited to be here with one of my best friends, Brady Shearer.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, man. One of the things I'm really excited about on this show is just the idea of possibility and the idea that if you could change what you believe, you could change what's possible. And so just exploring with people that I really care about and admire how they've kind of adopted the mentality of possibility that they have. So I'd love for us to talk a little bit today about how we met and riff a little bit through faith, friendship, and family, because I think those things are the things that maybe they see Brady Shearer, the 150,000 subs, Instagram, impacting the church globally, Brady, but I have the privilege of knowing you as a friend. And that's actually, I think, one of my favorite parts about our relationship is it started that way before all the followers and before all the, product launches, all the things that you've done, which I think a lot of people are really impressed by, including me. But I knew you before that. So I want to go back to the days when we met. And do you remember actually the day we met?
Who could forget? Yes. So I have my degree in theology and youth ministry.
Yep.
And to predate Justin and I meeting, for a little bit of background context, I was living in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Yes.
I was newly married and I had started this blog, prochurchtools.com, because I was this media director at a church. And as I was learning skills, I was like, well, I'm not anything special. I'm going to teach these skills online. And it came to the point where my wife and I, who are not from Alberta, we're from Ontario, we're like, this place is only winter. And everyone there locally is like, isn't it great?
You're like, no.
And they're like, we don't even salt our roads here because we're built different. I was like, well, I'm not. So I need to go back to where I'm from. And there was this church that I admired online, Central Community Church.
Right.
And I remember stalking the Vimeo page of Central.
Back in the day.
And I was like, whoa, look at all these like videos they're making. Yeah. And I remember like emailing the church and I was like, hey, I don't know, but I actually just graduated Bible college, so I'm pretty much ready and arrived at this point. I'd love to work at your church. And the email was like, very delicately and kind, in not as many words, okay.
Great.
So I go, okay, whatever. I got this blog and, it's doing pretty well. So my wife and I move across the country. We settle in Niagara Falls. And one of the 5 reasons that we moved to this region was because there was this church that I could see myself like being a part of. And that was exciting. Because that was one of the hardest parts of living in Edmonton was I had developed great friendships with a great church there.
Yeah.
So we started attending Central. And, by the time like we had moved, because, moving and buying a house sometimes takes, several months. And we actually bought this house and like my wife had never even been there because we were, flying back
in
and forth.
Kind of the ghetto of Niagara Falls.
First of all, the second reason of 5, we only like to use the word ghetto, frankly. The second word of
we love the ghetto, but it's a little bit ghetto-y.
Okay, we called it the medium ghetto. My first employee, he moved to the actual ghetto. Anyway, if you don't know the lay of the land in Niagara, this is not relevant. The point was, the second reason of 5 why I moved to Niagara Falls was the housing was outrageously affordable.
Yes.
And so we moved into a place back then that was very affordable. And perhaps location played a role. Understood. Yes. And so we started attending this church. At this time, it had been like 6 months since that first email.
Yeah.
And the business, which officially incorporated the same month we moved to Niagara, had become an actual business. And so I no longer needed employment at Central. But I still wanted to serve and be a part.
Yeah.
So I reach out and eventually, because there was a Niagara Falls campus of our church at the time, the campus pastor of the Niagara Falls campus says, okay, I'll meet you at a dingy coffee shop in my medium ghetto area.
And for those that don't know, said pastor was me.
Whoa. Surprise.
Surprise. That's awesome. Well, it's funny because I remember when we met and you, yeah, like I can't even remember all the things we talked about. I think we just had everything. It was all the things we had in common: cameras. It was love of video world. It was music. It was kind of, similar faith. Mennonite. Like we had all these things in common. And I don't know if it was that day or if it was like another one. If we said, hey, we should do this again. But it was like shortly after we just decided we were going to do this every Thursday.
And we have for about a decade.
Yeah.
I think we recognized like there was like a kinship, both by blood, as we would learn years later, as distant cousins.
We could be related even at this point. We don't know.
No, we know. We definitely are. Like there's only like 18 Mennonites. So I remember because I told my mom, I was like, Mom, one of the things I lamented about leaving my old church was like, the pastor there was like so involved in creative. What are the chances like at this new church, the pastor will be involved in creative? And like within the first week, I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like this is so great for me. And she's like, well, what's his name? And I say, well, his name is Justin Driedger. And she's like, Driedger? Like Jake Driedger? Like my uncle? And I was like, I don't know, Mom. Like, can we talk about something else? She's like, let me break out the family tree. And so she only cared about the fact that we were related.
Yeah. So good. Well, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I remember it's funny, like, 10 years ago, starting to meet, and then we started to get to know each other, and you unlocked something for me that I'd never really believed I could have. So it's funny because as we start the show, one of the belief systems I had was that nobody, if they really got to know me, would be my true close friend. Like I believe there was always this kind of level of I needed to keep people at bay because if they really knew how uncreative I felt or what I believed about myself, which was in a lot of ways, you fostered something in me, a belief in myself that I could be what I felt like God wanted me to be. And I remember as we kind of, started to kind of hang out, we went on this trip together. So I want to just talk about this real quick because I think you remember this moment because we've talked about it many times. But we were on a trip filming in Phoenix. And I think, I can't remember the details exactly. I just know that I was pushing you away, I think. So it's weird because when I talk about you, it's almost like we were dating, but we're just friends. But it's in that same vein because I remember being like, listen, he's gonna see me and he's gonna be like, I don't really want to be friends with this guy. And I remember kind of pushing you away. And I don't know what kind of happened, but I had a moment where I was like, listen, man, I just think you're gonna see me and you're gonna reject me. And it was kind of a weird thing because I didn't even want to say it. I just felt like a weird thing to say. And I remember you kind of just looking at me like, I would have no reason to reject you. Like you just had this like innocent, like, I am your friend. I chose to be your friend and I have no reason that I would ever not be your friend. And I never had that experience, funny enough, till my 30s. And it unlocked something in me. And then it's funny because I was like, all right, well, and we cried together. And I had this moment where I was like, listen, I want to show you my favorite movie of all time. And it somehow was connected, but it was really like, it was this weird like picture of actually how I felt about myself. It was Good Will Hunting. And we watched this movie and it was like, and if, I don't know if you know that movie, but that movie really is about somebody who he tries to push people away before they can really get close to him because he's been hurt. And one of the things that I feel like you've unlocked in me is just this like belief that people can actually accept you for who you are and call out the best in you. So maybe talk a little bit about just friendship. How did you kind of develop that? Like, I don't know, maybe you did assume the worst of me and you just chose to look past it, but you just accepted, friendship, and you showed me a little bit about what that could look like in a really healthy kind of way. What sort of like, I guess, what is that in you that you just kind of see that in people?
I mean, a few things about me. One is that I have very few friends.
Yeah.
Which is not especially rare, I suppose, for men of our age.
Yeah.
But for example, the first like 6 employees at our company were my friends from youth group.
Right.
So the friends that I do have, of which there are like 7,
yeah,
I've known for a long time.
Yeah.
And we keep the circle close. And like, I believe in longevity in relationships above anything else.
Yeah.
I married my wife when I was 21.
Yeah.
So I'm 34 this year. We'll have been married 13 years. We'll have been together for 16 years. Like we turned 18 because there was kind of like this unwritten, kind of written rule in our youth group. Like, don't date until you're an adult.
Right.
Like I asked her to like be my girlfriend a month after she turned 18.
Yeah.
So like my entire adult life, I've been like with one woman.
Yeah.
And the same group of friends.
Right.
Essentially. And so I remember when you asked that question, and I kind of like, it struck me as strange.
Yeah. I remember you looking at me like, what are you talking about?
Because I was like, well, I've chosen you to be my friend,
Yeah.
and you've chosen me to be your friend.
Yeah.
So now we're friends.
Yeah.
It's almost like, when you're playing
Yeah.
on the school ground, like as a kid, you had mini sticks.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're my friend. Okay, I'm your friend.
Yeah.
It's like, you're just locked
And
in.
it's a weird dynamic. Like that's one thing when you're like 12, and then a different thing when you're like 30.
Well, and I think, there is an age difference between us of about a decade.
Yeah.
And I think that probably played a role.
Right.
Because I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And I had only been friends with the people I had been friends with.
Yeah.
So there was no experience in my life where I had lost friends.
Right.
And one of the core reasons why I started the business, after it had funded my own desires, which was I want to be able to have my wife stay at home.
Yeah.
I want to be able to work from home, and I want us to have freedom of time. That was like ultimate priority number one.
Yeah.
Once that was achieved, I was like, hey, my friend works at Foot Locker.
Yeah.
Maybe he could not, and he could work with me. Wouldn't that be cool? Like work with people you love and make cool things.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be awesome. And so like, I was only friends with the people I was friends with. So the idea that you would like grow apart was foreign to me. But I could see that coming because like you grow up and you have kids or you have to move for work. And like what happens is you don't get to spend time with as many people as possible. So I was like, maybe the business could supplement that in a way.
Right.
And
so everyone just moved to Niagara.
Basically, yeah. Yeah. And then, we became friends. And there's also an element of this that happens like when I think you travel. And like since I was a kid, like I have always wanted to travel.
Yeah.
And when my wife and I first got married, I remember hacking credit cards where I would like sign up for Amexes, get the points. So that the first trip we ever took was newly married. We couldn't afford it. My mom was like, we have this like apartment in Fort Lauderdale. I know you're in Bible college. I can't pay for your ticket. If you can get from Edmonton to Fort Lauderdale, shockingly, no direct flights, you can hang out at this apartment. And I was like, great. So I got like 7 credit cards and we flew connecting through Houston to go to Fort Lauderdale. Yeah. That was how much I love travel. When we moved to Niagara, I had begun this quest of visiting all 30 Major League Baseball parks.
Yes.
The reason we were in Phoenix was to film for work, but also because the Blue Jays were playing there. And that was one of the ballparks that we needed to check off.
Yep.
And so we're together. And if you've ever like been on a trip, as surely we all have, it doesn't need to be like exotic, like Phoenix, Arizona. Yeah. It could be anywhere. You get in a different state of mind. Case in point. If you've ever had a meal when you're traveling, that meal will taste better than the same meal served at home.
Yep.
And so all of these conditions had created this moment where I think for the first time you were able to be like honest with somebody else. And we didn't have a history of years. Yeah. And I wasn't from here. And I really wasn't like one of your parishioners because that can be a challenge with pastors. It's like, hey, I can't really let you get too close because like I have to maintain a level of distance because of my role. Like ideally it would be different, but it's not. Yeah. None of that junk had existed. And so that created this perfect storm.
Yeah. Well, I think that was part of it too, because I feel like, as campus pastor, well, just as a church planter, I was, you're kind of always wondering, like, are people going to, are they going to reject me? And they're going to say, it's not me. It's just that, it's just the church, or I just feel God calling me somewhere else. And ultimately it does feel kind of like it's you, So I was like bracing for that, but you never did that. So yeah.
Until 10 years I've waited and I got a lot to say.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay. Well, I want to talk about that mindset as it relates to, you've talked to me a lot about your mom. And so I want to talk about family because you've really pushed me in this area of just how you view your family. I love your family. I love your wife, your kids. Your wife is one of the most creative. She's good friends with my wife and she's just like the best gift giver. Your daughters are like your oldest has the biggest imagination you've ever seen, and she's this big personality, and your youngest is just the cutest thing of all time. She's literally the best. But what you fostered with your family, I know a lot of it you talked about your mom, but can you actually? I guess I don't know that people really can understand fully how much your mom has impacted you in terms of like how you just see the world, like in terms of just faith, possibility, all of that. Can you speak a little bit to just how she shaped maybe how you viewed even just questions with faith and how you treat your family now? Maybe just speak to that.
Yeah. So my mom by far greatest mentor
Yeah.
of my life. Another thing that Justin and I share is that we both lost our moms like
Yes.
much earlier than we should have.
Yeah.
So I was, around like mid-20s.
Yep. Me too.
Um,
25.
Yeah. So almost at the exact same time, shortly after I moved away for Bible college, like I came home, mom was like, listen, I have cancer.
Yeah.
And she lived for another 5 years, which
Right.
was a lot longer than we initially anticipated.
Yeah.
But, from a young age, she was like the most important person in my life.
Yeah.
And I attended this really small Baptist church growing up. It was in the country. There was like 17 people.
Yeah.
There was no PA system. There was wooden pews. We had one acoustic guitarist, 2 on big days. And there was like no mic. Like the pastor didn't preach into a mic. He just preached to like the room.
Right.
We just sang with
Yeah.
acoustic guitars. The big tech was we had an overhead system.
Right.
So when we got to the days of Elijah Bridge, like that didn't fill the first page. So you had to flip it.
Was that your job?
No, I was never cool. No, that was always pastor's
Okay,
kids.
yeah.
I couldn't operate the. And that's why I left that church in high school and I started attending a Pentecostal youth group because my mom could tell she's like, this church is not in any way connecting with him. So I get connected to this youth group where I, and eventually meet my wife.
Yeah.
I met her pretty quickly, but got married a little later.
Yes.
And all of my friends who now, work at the company with us.
Yeah.
And it was there where like faith became my own for the first time.
Yeah.
So much so that like this was an intense youth group.
Right.
Like I would leave school on a Friday and like walk like across town 5 kilometers on like major roads to get to church so we could set up youth group. Like
Right.
Friday night was the only reason to exist.
Yep.
And my mom, even in that time, she was like, man, I'm so glad this faith is your own. But famously she said, it's okay, son, to kiss a girl. Because I was like, Mom, I'm saving myself for marriage. She's like, no, I get that. Like, yeah, that's great and all. Like, but you can go to prom. And I was like, I can't go to prom, Mom.
Not until I'm married.
I am volunteering at junior youth and we're going to Wonderland. So I missed my prom. And she was like, you could not, like, you might regret this. And my wife to this day will be like, I had to go with another boy to prom because you were at junior youth. And I was like, I was there for the kids, sweetie. So my mom was always very measured.
Yeah.
So she could tell that I was a person of extremes. My youth pastor would always say this about me. The metaphor he would use, he's like, you're kind of like this like racing horse
Yeah.
that like has never been like taught how to run in a straight line. And so like you could outrun any other like racing horse.
Yeah.
But you just like go crazy.
Right.
Like if you can ever channel all of that energy and all that passion into something that was like productive and not just productive mixed with destructive,
Right.
the fruit that would come from that would be a lot greater. And I think my mom recognized that in me well before anyone else did, obviously.
Yep.
And so she was always trying to like help me stay measured. What that did was it created this safe space for me where there was no question off limits. There was nothing in my behavior that I ever did that could push her away.
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, she always believed in me.
Yeah.
My youth pastor, he would sometimes be a little bit too critical because I was a little bit of a sensitive boy. And my mom, to her credit, like always created space and almost like a bit of delusion. And her and dad were both credit to this.
Yeah.
Where they were just like, son, do you know how great you are? Do you know how talented you are? You're so smart. You're so wonderful. Everything you do, this is what they would always say. No matter what you put your mind to, it succeeds. My poor sister over there was just, I was like, what about me? And they're like, we love you too, sweetie.
But this is for you, Brady.
And, my business success kind of came before my prefrontal cortex fully developed.
Yeah.
And the phrase that we always use in our company is calculated delusion.
Right.
Just like for you to achieve anything that is out of the ordinary, there has to be a certain level of delusion that you carry within you.
Right.
And so long as that delusion is calculated and not reckless delusion, it's important. And that's it's the phrase calculated delusion is obviously 2 opposing ideas that you have to hold together.
Which is a core value now for part of the company, right?
Yeah. Because
Calculated
the
delusion.
older you get and the more the business grows, and now that the business, it's not just one person, it's many, and it's not just many single young people in their 20s, but now we have children and mortgages, and there are dozens of employees.
More
and
at
so
stake.
You can start to play it a little more conservative, which to a point you have to, but on the other hand, you want to maintain that big perspective, and it all goes back to my mom.
I love that. So maybe flesh that out a little bit. So as you've now started the company, I guess for me, I'm always curious about how people's minds work around what's crazy is we'll go away for Christmas. I remember this, I think this might have happened a couple years ago, and you literally were kind of riffing on an idea. And then I come back like a month later or whatever through those next few weeks. Yeah, you're like, yeah, we launched it, and a bunch of people are pretty excited about it. And I'm like, what do you mean you just thought about that and then you just did it? Like, so how much of that is related to mom, like that delusional, just like, hey, I just believe I could do it, and like, I guess how does your brain work around you just see, I guess, yeah, what do you see? Like when you see like, hey, I got this business idea or this extra, add on for people, like what's happening in your brain when you have these ideas? Have you ever really thought about that?
Yeah. So I think a big part of it is like this concept of inertia.
Yeah.
Inertia can work in a positive and it can work in the negative.
Right.
If you try something and it fails,
Mm.
what that kind of conditions you to believe is like,
Yeah.
oh, you know what? When I try things, people,
Yeah.
don't respond. They don't really work. If you try something and it succeeds,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, that thing works. I must be good at doing the things.
Right.
I'll try another thing and I'll try another thing.
Yeah.
And so
did you just keep trying stuff because it kept working?
Well, there's two. I mean, I'm gonna butcher these sayings because I think
Yeah.
there's like two that I'm mixing, but it's like, there's genetics loads the gun and like behavior pulls the trigger, or like,
Okay.
nature loads the gun and then nurture pulls the trigger.
Yeah.
The idea that like, yes, my parents instilled in me this self-belief
Right.
that was nauseating.
Yeah.
Like I would say to them, like, stop it. Like you are all being delusional.
Yeah.
My parents put me in basketball. So like I played basketball, very competitive, very
Yeah.
high level from a very young age.
Right.
I'm in 9th grade and my dad's like, son, you're just so tall. I was 4'9" in grade 9. You're 5'3". I'm like, Dad, I can't play basketball anymore. He's like, son, you can do anything. Muggsy Bogues played for the Raptors and he was 5'3". And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, but like if we're running probabilistic equations here, it seems unlikely.
Yeah.
So like they were to the point of like, you can do anything, son, you can do anything.
Yeah.
But what was also true was that I tried so many things.
Right.
I had like a DJ phase.
Songwriter.
Yes,
Recorded an album.
We shouldn't go through all the different
Should
things.
we post the album in the comments?
I mean, what's important is we change the subject to my first year in Bible college. This is probably the best example.
Yeah.
No matter what I do, I will put 100% of
Yes.
energy and effort and focus into it. When I realized I wanted to become a youth pastor, which
Yeah.
of course I did not,
Yes.
but when I realized I wanted to like serve churches, my grades in school started to dip in like 11 and 12 because I was literally buying the textbooks that I was going to have in Bible college and reading them ahead of time.
Right.
When I got into first year, my Pauline literature course, I got 106 in because I aced everything and then I handed everything in so early that I got extra credit because I handed the things in early.
Yeah.
What it also tells you is that Bible college is maybe not up to the standard of some other schools where you can't achieve 106%. I don't know if Harvard gives out. Oh, yeah, well done, physics, 106. And so you start with that self-belief.
Yeah.
And then the first few things in business, like they did well. And so then you're like, you come to it with self-belief.
Like a snowball, yeah.
And then things start to work.
Right.
And that's not to say that we haven't encountered challenges and we haven't had failures and we haven't made mistakes and we haven't had big setbacks.
Yeah.
But what I also did from the very beginning, and this is like, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, my parents did not provide me with that upbringing, so this wasn't possible for me. Like, let's be clear. I had so much self-doubt. And my parents literally said, do not start a business. This is absurd. Finish your schooling. You can't just make money on the internet, son. So they also turned into my biggest haters, which speaks to another part of my motivation, which is if you ever go against me, I will do something just to prove you wrong.
But I feel like that drives you even more. You're like, well, then I'll show you that I absolutely can do it.
Yeah, there was a little bit of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have the self-belief from the beginning. If you don't, I remember keeping this Evernote. So this digital journal, basically, of any time in the very early stages, whether it was Bible college or whether it was business, when somebody who was farther along than me acknowledged what I was doing and said, like, you're doing well.
Yeah.
So I remember there was this business person in the church space that I looked up to. He was, 10 years my senior. And when I arrived and after the first year, he wrote me and he was like, hey man, great work. You really fit in here. Like I copied that and I pasted it into the Evernote. I had a professor that wrote me once and said like, the way you write is better than your peers.
Yeah.
And I copied that and I pasted it.
Got
I was like, anytime someone affirmed something in me, I was going to write it down because what I knew was the self-doubt in my head would always be louder than whatever that person said. The self-doubt in my head that might be rooted in some truth, but was louder than it should have been.
Right.
And the compliments that were also rooted in some truth being quieter than they should have been.
Right.
So I wrote it down. And anytime I was feeling self-doubt, I returned to that and I reminded myself, no, you are capable. You are competent. and like you have the ability to do this.
I love that.
And that then fosters more belief in yourself. And so you cannot just be given these things.
Right.
That's the whole nature loads the gun, nurture pulls the trigger.
Yep.
Like, sure, some people have good upbringings.
Yeah.
And I have that unfair advantage of amazing parents.
Yes.
Guess what? I'm also in an industry that is purely American. And I grew up in a town of 3,000 as a Canadian with no pedigree in this industry whatsoever. So like there are challenges that we all have to overcome.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, because I feel like that's such a positive take on it, because it's like, I feel like for a lot of us, we didn't grow up with that. So, the idea that you're even the sum total or the sum average, I guess, of your top 3 people, top 5 people even, right? I've often read about that too, that idea that you're like, you're somewhere in the middle of the people you surround yourself with. So you can actually invert that narrative if you didn't grow up with it by, like keeping a journal or surrounding yourself with people that, and I think that's probably what I think has really, helped me in our friendship is you just see possibility, which is why I think I've naturally gravitated to want to be around you, because it's like, I just want to be around people who see that, who see the world for what could be possible. And I do agree. I feel like there's something about that with our kids too. Like we've kind of experimented on a similar plane with our kids. We just say, we're fighting this narrative that teenagers are the worst. And we just say, to our kids, we say it blatantly, like, hey, we hit the lottery with you guys. You guys are the best. Like, you guys are so well behaved. You guys are so caring for others. You are selfless and you're generous. And we speak all these things into them. And do they make mistakes along the way? Absolutely. But they are actually really good kids. And we just, again, speak into that. So I love that it's kind of both. If you haven't had it, you can nurture it. And if you, but if you nurture it, make sure you're nurturing it with the right people and surround yourself with those. So that's really good. Okay, talk a little bit about faith then, in terms of, one of the things we talk about every Thursday too is just how our run-in with Jesus has actually impacted us to, we want to be just better men, whether it's like better in what we do with our work, better leaders, in our perspective. For you, it's company. For me, it's in church world, better dads. We talk a lot about that too. Talk to me about something that you say often, that love requires everything. Where did you kind of adopt that idea?
Yeah, it was indeed adopted because there may or may not be another pastor in the room outside of the cameras who originally came up with that idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was shared with me by Pastor Alex. And I remember hearing it and being like, sometimes you hear phrasing of something that to be true, but you've never heard it phrased that way.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about like creating is writing in such a way where complex ideas become accessible. I feel like that's one of my skills. Yep. And so when someone unlocks that for me, I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. And that can become a value. And of course, love requires everything can be directly traced to the person of Jesus and the sacrifice of Jesus. And what it does is it always calls you to more. And I think like in any relationship, for it to be healthy, marriage, intimate friendships, parenting, we have to avoid at all costs the numbers game where you're like keeping score on like who's done what and who should be doing more.
Record wrongs.
And the idea of like, we have to achieve equality here.
Yeah.
Love requires everything. The simple idea is like, I can always do more and I am not worried about like what you're contributing.
Yeah.
And it's not a practical mentality. Yeah. But what I find is, at least for me, it remains like an anchor in this North Star where like, as I start to put my own self-interests first, or when I start to feel like internally resentful or bitter. For example, we had this last night where we were discussing some conflict between a few of our employees. Yeah. And my wife goes, well, they said this. And I was like, okay, well, they said this. And we're trying to figure out like, she was like, good luck with that, I don't envy being in charge. Yeah. And what I said to her after we had kind of discussed the practicals of conflict resolution was, our desire is to be in relationship with the same people for a long time. Yeah. That necessitates conflict. It necessitates repeated conflict over and over and over again. And what happens in most human relationships is repeated conflict births bitterness. Yeah. And so if we decide to say, oh, we care about longevity and friendships, what that also means is then we have to commit ourselves to continually forgiving and fighting against bitterness, like growing in us.
Yeah.
And we're responsible for any seeds of bitterness that we let grow or that we plant, and we have to rip them out.
Yeah.
Because otherwise what'll happen is we'll just churn through relationships the way most relationships go. And I looked at her and I thought, I was originally going to say, babe, I let things go with you all the time. And instead I was like, ooh, that's not a good way of framing things.
Yeah.
I said, sweetie, like, think of how many times I've done something that's bothered you.
Yeah.
And you've thought to yourself, I could bring this up, but I'm just going to let it go. Oh my goodness. You should have seen the resolution on this woman's face. She's like, oh, light bulb moment.
Yeah.
You're so right, babe. And I was like, you're a little too enthusiastic about this, but I'm glad.
How many of those things do you have, actually, now that we're on this?
I didn't think you'd be that in agreement. And I think, like, when I said that out loud, it made sense for her. And the idea being, like, if you want to be in these relationships, you can't just bring up every single thing.
Yeah.
You can't decide, you know what? We have this value. And technically, you crossed the line on this value. And so you are in wrong. It's like, okay, sure. But, like, you got to push through it.
Yeah. I love that you do that, because I feel like that's...
I don't know if I love that I do it.
I think it's the hard road.
Sure feels that way sometimes.
It's the narrow road, because I feel like it's actually what's so maybe ugly about our world. It's what's ugly about, I feel like, even the way you navigate your online world, right? It's like we're quick to, keyboard warrior, and we're just like, we'll just say whatever we sort of feel that fits our sort of narrative or our political party. And it's like, man, I feel like if we could be a lot better at just choosing to love above everything, I think there's something about that it would make us actually better leaders. It would make us better, entrepreneurs, because we just choose to, like, I'm going to choose to forgive you over and over. I'm going to choose to believe the best. I'm going to choose to, actually put aside this offense. I'm going to choose to not just cancel you like everybody else, and I'm going to love you. And I think if we could be more like that, actually, that's actually the way that we were created to be. I think that is the way to possibility.
And we have these codified values at our company that we've talked about frequently.
Yeah.
And
talk about those.
I have literally every single one of them tattooed on my leg. It goes all the way up. And the reason that we talk about these values is that they help navigate practical problems.
Yep.
So, okay, this is the principle that we uphold. This is the conflict that we're navigating. How do we align this conflict with the principle? Here's how we move forward. And then what we found was, after having these values for a while, man, it is sure hard to be a person that sticks to their principles.
Right.
I prefer to not and do what I want.
Yes.
And that was why I think this idea of love requires everything resonated so much, because, like, especially as followers of Christ, we can claim that we want to uphold these values in Scripture and claim that we believe in these principles. And it really sounds great. And it puts everything in a neat box. And we all love the idea of, like, principles that we can follow, because it takes the chaos of life and allows us to, like, move forward throughout it, until you have to actually, like, do the hard work. And so the love requires everything phrase basically became this chorus that I would tell myself every time my values had to be lived out when I didn't want to actually do it. And so of course this is hard. Love requires everything. Of course this is uncomfortable. Of course, like, denying yourself in this way, or basically, like, taking the lower seat at the table, or allowing what is not fair to basically just slough it aside. Like, of course that's not fun, but it's because love requires everything. And every time I could come back to that, it was like a good reminder of, like, why I'm doing something. And it didn't feel like wrong that this thing was happening that was unjust or unfortunate.
I feel like at the core of love requires everything too is it's like connection. Like, why would you choose that? It's because, like, connection to God and to others is like it's the pinnacle of what we're actually created for, to be connected. And to choose not to do that is to create, like, divide. It's to be, to be disconnected, and I feel like that's the beautiful path, even though it is hard, but it's okay. Talk a little bit about your, how your faith journey has just evolved. And I know for a season we had a friendship that didn't have a lot to do with faith, because that season you were really struggling. And that's, like, my job is faith world. Right. And, but we navigated kind of through that. And then maybe how you sort of come out the other side of navigating, just faith. What was it that kind of, like, made you just kind of battle with it and struggle with it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a very empirical thinker. And what I tried to do for a long time was, like, fit God in a box. And at the very beginning, as a young person, I think it was, like, a noble pursuit. Like, I loved reading apologetics. As a kid, because, like, and as a kid, what I mean is, like, 15, 16, it's like, hey, look, this old book of ancient wisdom can be explained with like modern interpretations. Like it's not just like this superstition, like we can prove X, Y, and Z. And that gave me this level of certainty. And then, you know, I hit like my mid-20s, and I think the biology that's happening here, the physiology, is like your prefrontal cortex.
25, it's now.
And the reason I keep bringing this up is like back to my mom. Anytime I do something silly, she'd be like, prefrontal cortex. You can't be trusted to make any decisions. And she always wanted to remind me that like there will come a day where you are more able to see the world soberly that you cannot now. And so around that time, this idea of like empiricism and faith, they started to kind of like meet each other in not, they was oil and water. They were not mixing well. And I was like, well, my entire worldview is based around like, you know, empiricism. And I want to keep faith as separate because I can understand cognitively that God should not belong in my like small human worldview. But just because you understand something cognitively doesn't mean like you could feel it in your heart. What was also happening at this time was I had a lot of like small t trauma from youth group and from church. I got involved in like some really like charismaniac things. Just by extension, if I'm in Bible college and like, oh, they need help here, they need help there. I was like, okay, I'll go here. And suddenly I had developed like a lot of like not cool things about church where like it was challenging to even be in church. Not because like I wasn't feeling it, sure, but also because I was having like these like, you know, physical, not feel good reactions and experiences in church. And so like, it was hard to go. And that was a really challenging time because like in my mind, I'm like, I want to do this. And in my heart, it's like, I can't. And there was literally no way of reconciling those two. Before my mom passed, I had recorded this phone call with her. And in it, she was like, sweetie, I know you believe in the ways of Jesus. She's like, you have to strive to believe in the person of Jesus. You can't just use him as like, this is the code for living. There has to be an element of he rose from the dead and there's a supernatural. She's like, you don't have to believe in it with certainty. She's like, how could you? I'm about to die. Like, I don't know what's on the other side. But you have to like strive to want that and believe in it. It won't be certainty, but believe in it. And I was like, I remember hearing that call and I was like, Mom, I want to do that, but like, how do I do that? And there was just years.
Like I want to believe, help my faith, but
there was a lot of that. And it was years of limbo where, you know, you're just like feeling like an imposter in some ways, especially because like you're serving in church and you want these things, but like, you can't force yourself to feel them. And then I remember one day it was gone. And I'm not the type of person to have ever experienced like miracles. There have been two, and both have been like God just like changing my heart in a way that shouldn't have been changed, in a way that like doesn't make any sense. And I had just strived so long to reconcile these two things. And then one day it didn't matter anymore. I didn't fix it.
What is that? Have you thought about like,
I mean, the Lord, like the only way I can chalk it up to is like, you know, either God was like, I see you trying, son, you're trying and you can't get over this. So I'm just going to like, you know, fix this little thing for you. Or that's like just like the work of following Jesus, where like sometimes you're trying to be obedient, even though like you don't feel it. And then eventually, you know, things change. Like it could be a miracle. It could also just be like what I kind of like, I talk about this with my daughter because she won't eat any food. Neither of my daughters will. And I'll make something and my mom, my wife will be like, wow, this is so good. This is so yummy. And my kids will be like, you suck. Get us McNuggets. And like my daughter will like take a bite of like beef and she'll like gag it out. She's like, this is awful. And I was like, my mom, God bless her, was the worst cook in the history of humankind.
I have heard the story.
And so I'll say to my kids, I'm like, no, I know bad food. Like I'm asking so little of you. And one thing I know about taste buds is that like they like just regenerate. And like every 7 years, like your tastes change. And like the way you experience food literally change. And so how you taste food as a kid will be different from your 20s, will be different from your 60s and onward. And so it could have just been like, you just suffer in the right direction for long enough until eventually like, okay, it just resolves.
Maybe faith is like a muscle. You just keep exercising and eventually it's like, oh, okay.
I think whether you're the type of person to believe like God miraculously fixed that or the type of person to be like, no, like God was there with you the entire journey and the faithfulness was that you never gave up and he never gave up and you figured it out. I think either of those interpretations works.
I think too, like for me, I never held that over you in our friendship.
Right. Like
it was never a thing. I was
every
like,
week
well,
I
listen.
met with this pastor.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't need to say it for himself. Like I will say it for him.
Yeah.
Every week he met with me. And the same was true, Pastor Alex on the other side.
Yeah.
Like two of my very best friends, both pastors. And I'm like, you know, God, is he real? And they're like, anyway. And at no point, I don't know how many people could say this. At no point from either of my pastors did I feel like they were like, man, you got to come back to church.
Right.
Like, you can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like they were just so patient for years, people. Like patient for years to the point where they should, like, surely both of them at one point thought, well, yeah, like, I don't think this is ever going to resolve.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to resolve.
Yep.
And, you know, praise God.
Yeah. I mean, it was challenging in the sense of I felt like there's a large part of my life I couldn't share with you.
Right. Because every time you're like, I sang this new song at church and I was like, oh, triggered.
Yeah, triggered. Like I have this really creative video, this thing we did.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah, I wanted to talk about just from your faith journey. Has your run-in with Jesus kind of since maybe then, and has it impacted how you view what's possible in the world of, you know, helping churches and what you do as a company? I guess how has that shaped maybe even what you do? Like why churches? Like what is it about that you still feel like I got to do this? Like what gets you up in the morning around impacting, I guess just churches really across the world?
I mean, I've only ever worked for and with churches.
Yep.
Ever. I did cut deli meats. That was my high school job at the grocery store. I can't say that was my calling, but I did enjoy it.
Okay.
And I think I was pretty darn good at cutting the meats.
Yeah.
I did not become a youth pastor because I didn't believe I had the relational bandwidth to do the job well.
Yeah.
I was interning under a youth pastor, and you just see how much is required deservedly by these kids to be a good youth pastor. Like he's up, you know, every night, he's texting, he's going to sports games, he's like consoling,
Right.
he's discipling. And I'm like, when do you, and then you wake up and go to your real job? Like, cause he was bivocational. I was like, when do you like, he's like, I don't. Like, this is what it is. And I was like, I am more of a get in the lab and tinker alone type of person. And I just kind of came to this conclusion, like, if I go forward with this, either the kids will not get what they need, I will not get what I need, or my wife will not get what she needs. And something destructive is going to happen either way. And then you're kind of at a crossroads because I only wanted to serve churches. So that was what was the, you know, advent of the company. The company has had many opportunities through the years to expand. And I just have no desire to. Like it could not interest me less to serve accountants with a website product.
Right.
Like we have 3,000 churches that host their website on our software.
Yep.
The idea of them being like pivoting and being like, wow, we'd love to serve wedding photographers. Oh, I want a gag. Could not interest me any less.
Yeah.
And so again, however you want to interpret that, is that calling? Is that, you know, DNA? Is that like the grace that I carry? Whatever it might be, like that's my lane.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful that I found my lane to run in at an early age.
Yeah.
But you know, wherever you are at in your own journey of life, like life is very long. You have so many opportunities to pivot, to change, to augment, to supplement. And I think like trying to find that lane of yours is always worth, you know, chasing.
For anybody who's listening who maybe feels like they just are stuck, or maybe even, so maybe speak to church world first. What are some areas that you feel like, what are you hopeful about for church world? What are you frustrated with? Is there anything that you feel like right now it's like, man, you wish churches could know, like around in this realm of possibility? Like, are there places you're kind of seeing people get stuck or hung up right now? Or what are some of the things that you're kind of observing as it relates to communication, as it relates to, just how churches are engaging the world around them? Like, what are you kind of seeing?
I mean, in terms of possibility, like social media affords our churches the ability to reach people in ways that would have been previously unimaginable in human history. I had a church last year, small Australian church. And I like using them as an example because like we come from a Canadian context. Most American churches are 100 people or fewer. Yeah. So even in America, the idea that like every church is massive is not true. There's a small Australian church with a pastor roughly our age, in that range. Not your age.
And you're saying I'm old?
I didn't say that. And he he writes me and he's like, hey man, like I was following your advice and making like sermon clips.
Yeah.
And like one went like really viral, like millions of views.
Yeah.
And he's like, why did this happen? I'm just like some random person.
Yeah.
And he was navigating the tension of publishing his sermons because he didn't want, like, he comes from Australia.
Right.
He didn't want people to think like, who do you think you are?
Right.
Like publishing.
We don't have hero culture in Canada or Australia.
No, like that's not a thing.
Yeah.
I was in Australia. They're like, yeah, we actually have this thing called tall poppy culture. You've never heard of it. And I was like, I'm not from America.
Yeah.
I guarantee you I've heard of it.
Yeah.
And he was trying to navigate that because people were like, why are you publishing this online? Like, and I said to him, I was like, it would be absurd if another pastor came to your church and thought to themselves, who is this pastor on stage preaching for 30 minutes? Who does he think he is? No, on the contrary, you would leave a church service and be like, they didn't preach the gospel. This is not a faithful Christian church.
Yeah.
This pastor followed up with me a year later on a social post because I was like, hey, social's good, do it.
Yeah.
And he wrote, and he's like, just for anyone that's like skeptical, I made this video, I published all year. One of our posts went crazy viral. And when you do this, for context, about 3 to 5% of your posts, you kind of want to hit that viral for me category.
Yeah.
So reaching like 10x your normal reach.
Yeah.
They're rare. He's like, I thought people that saw that post would just be like randos from around the world. He's like, the number of people that I can directly trace that have come to our church, stuck around, became volunteers, are in groups from that one post, he's like, is many.
Yeah.
The guy that I remember the most came and he said, I saw this preaching clip and I thought you were just some like hotshot pastor from America until I clicked on your profile and I was like, this church is down the road. I want to check it out. Even in the previous era of social, which in and of itself was like a modern miracle where you could reach people without being on a Super Bowl ad, for example, like traditional media, door knockers, newspaper ads, you would still have to pay for advertising. Now you can reach thousands of people in your local community just by taking the sermons you already have and repurposing them. Like I always say, like churches don't have the advantage of big budgets. We get it. We also have this amazing advantage of senior leaders creating sermons every single week. It's baked into the rhythm of church. If you're a real estate agent, if you're a dentist, you're a lawyer, you can like do all like the signing the contracts and cleaning the teeth and selling the homes. Then you're like, all right, what are we gonna do online? And churches have this tailor-made, ready for social piece of content that the senior leader made every week. And you just have to bring it to social. Like, I just don't want to gloss over how amazing of an opportunity it is.
Well, what I hear you saying too is like, it's interesting what we believe about the worth of our content, even like how would anyone want to, why would anyone want to hear this? Like, as though like, I'm just lucky enough my church wants to hear it. Like, heaven forbid more people would hear. Like, it's an interesting dichotomy of what we believe even about our message, right? Like that's a fascinating thing because I feel that like even starting the show, we've talked about this for a few years, this idea. And I was like, oh, I'm an imposter though, man. Like I suck on social. I'm terrible with this. Like do we really need another podcast? And yet like at my core, I was like, I want to help people unlock like a belief that things are possible, like there is more that's available. And so I'm challenging, it's actually a social experiment on myself, funny enough, doing this, but I love that because I feel like, for a lot of people, it'd be easy to get kind of stuck in, this is what I do. But like, to go, actually, there's more. And you can take this message and actually 10x it, leverage it, like use it to impact more people. And why wouldn't you do that? Like, why wouldn't you want to do that?
And if people are listening, and again, I think it could be nauseating listening to me and being like, oh yeah, it must've been hard to like find great success in your 20s. Like I'm like in my 40s, man. And you want me to like change? That's not easy. There's this quote that I remind myself often of, and it's from a famous person, but I can't remember. You'll have to forgive me. And it's, whether you believe it or not, it's true. And it's about like what you believe about yourself.
It's true.
And there are areas of my life that do not come easy. One of them is like nutrition. I'm the type of person, this is probably genetics, that thinks about food all the time. Like I just want food at all moments of life.
Me too.
And there are a lot of people that can relate.
Yeah.
So it has been very difficult for me to achieve my fitness goals because I continually undercut them with terrible eating.
Right.
I will like look back at my week and I'm like, great, 3 great gym sessions. I rode on the bike for 100 kilometers. I walked 15,000 steps a day and I ate
Taco Bell.
3,800 calories per day on average. Well, great. So a week of maintenance and all I did was spend like 100 hours at it. So like if you could just, and so I have this trainer and we only communicate via WhatsApp. He's in the UK.
Yeah.
Okay, all the Commonwealth countries, we all have to unite. And he'll continually say to me, like, Brady, this is your new identity.
Hmm.
This is who you are. This is not just like what you're doing. Because I'll come to him and I'll be like, well, you know, whenever I go on a trip, this happens.
Right.
Like, oh, like actually around this time of year, I tend to slip into this. And he's like,
Right.
that's your old identity. This is your new identity.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he's like a Christian, but like he's literally speaking like scripture over me. And he's saying like, you have to embrace your new identity. And like, this is who you are.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, it must be nice. It must be nice. I can't do this. Like there are things that we all believe about ourselves. And you know what? It wasn't your responsibility, the scripts that you were given. It's your responsibility now to write new ones, though.
I love that so much. I feel like, one of the terms we use here, we call it redocking your neurons. It's actually the idea that you have like these neural pathways that are like, they're like trenches like that you drive on. And you actually have to purposely get out of them. You have to begin to redock them to create new neural synapses in your brain to actually believe that there is something different. Because I feel like we get stuck in these belief systems. And like I've been I guess I play it over in my mind. I just don't want to be the guy who gets old and I'm so rigid that I can no longer believe for better, for more, for healthy relationships, for my kids to want to be around me. Like I want to challenge myself constantly. And I love that you said that. Like we got to keep doing that. Like, and I guess I'm always curious, like, how do you keep doing that? How do you not, how do you not get stuck just in the same sort of belief systems, and how do you continue? How do you keep pushing yourself?
You've mentioned a couple of times on this show, like, oh, it was valuable being in a relationship with me because I did this and it made you think this about yourself. That has gone both ways because like, if you've even heard how Justin and I speak on this, we do not talk in the same ways. We do not like approach problems in the same ways. We share many of the same interests, which is why we immediately connected.
I'm more of a feeler.
The way he problem solves is very different from how I problem solve. Why? He's a pastor and I am a nerd. Like,
an analytical nerd.
Exactly. And so when I travel with this man, because this is an interest we share, there have been many times where I have been like, I want to cover myself in a blanket and not be here because his behavior is driving me up the wall. The famous example I love to use is when, this was several years ago. They don't really get on you about this on airplanes anymore, but we were on a flight and this man would not take out his AirPod. And the flight attendant comes up and says, hey, sir, we're about to take off. Can you please take out your AirPod? And he's like, yeah, totally. Takes it out. She walks one row away, puts it back in. Flight attendant returns. Oh, you didn't want me to tell this story. No. She comes back and she says, sir, take out your AirPod. You're like, oh, yeah, right. Takes it out, puts it back in. She comes back and says, I need you to take out the AirPod. This man says, I agree. Takes out the right because that's the aisle AirPod. Puts in the left so she can't see it. It doesn't matter what she asks. He refuses. But that's like maybe the unhealthy expression.
Yeah, that was the unhealthy version of me, yes.
But where that comes from is something that I don't or did not yet possess.
Yeah.
Which is, as much as I believe in possibility in doing anything, I also am like, my mom, nickname for me, was rule boy.
Right.
There are constructs within the world that we follow. And when others step outside those constructs, they introduce chaos.
Yes.
And when chaos is introduced,
that's right.
The whole society falls apart. This man is an agent of chaos in the best way and in the worst way. In the same way that my analytical approach to life, in the best way and in the worst way. In the worst way to the point where I almost lost my faith because like I couldn't even like reconcile two ideas that did not neatly blend.
Yeah.
And so being in a relationship with him for a decade has made it where when I approach a challenge, his always way is like, well, we'll just figure it out. And I'm like, whoa, what's the plan?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, just figure it out.
There's a way. There's always a way.
I went and visited Australia for the first time and I had to drive on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
The last time I was in a country that drove on the other side of the road, I made Alex, who's over right here, drive the whole time because I was too afraid. Isn't that embarrassing? Isn't that embarrassing to not want to drive on the other side of the road?
Right.
But I didn't have a perfect framework for how I was going to do it. And I was like, I just would rather not.
Right.
And being with Justin enough times, when he was just like, just do it. Now, he wasn't in Australia, but I got behind that wheel and I remember being like, I have no idea what this is going to do, but there's no reason why I can't do this.
Right.
It was a muscle like I had not yet exercised.
Yeah.
And I did one rep in the gym and it barely did anything, but it was one rep. And the more that I build that muscle, the more I rewrite the script in my head.
Yeah.
How did that happen? By being in relationship with someone who approaches life differently. And so like, it can be difficult for you with willpower to like change who you are, probably because it's not possible.
Right.
But if you surround yourself with the right people, you commit to longevity in relationships, you do everything you can to uproot bitterness every time it gets gets planted in you, because if you want to be in a relationship with a long time with someone, you will have moments. You'll have your Good Will Hunting moment.
It's true. And you're so different than me. I was going to mention that too, is like we approach life so differently, but at the same point, I've come to really appreciate how you do. It's actually made me better. And I think that's the thing that's worth fighting for, is like, don't expect people to, I guess relationship isn't just people like thinking like you, or
hopefully not,
right? Or just looking for people to give you a feedback narrative to mirror your neurons, that they're just, they're the same kind of thing as you are. I think it's like, no, it's actually, you're sharpened by people who approach life differently. And that's actually what makes it better. Okay, we're out of time, I know, but if there was anything I didn't talk about today, or if there was like an idea that you're like, if you would really want people to know something about, possibility in their life, maybe they're a parent, maybe they're a church leader, maybe they're somebody who's just trying to be a better man or woman. I guess, what would be like your one thing you just really would want someone to know as it relates to what's possible?
I have it written on my wall, my chalkboard wall in my office. It says, you will overestimate what you can do in 1 year and underestimate what you can do in 10 years. Change happens at a snail's pace and then all at once.
Yeah.
And so committing to the right rhythms and committing to the process is what matters. At this stage in business, like the world and the internet is always changing. Things that used to work for me no longer work in the same way.
Yeah.
I'll try something, I'll throw it against the wall, and sometimes it'll be successful. And we'll talk for years about like, remember that time when we did this?
Yeah.
And then we'll be like, but there are all those other times where, this happened.
Yeah.
You can't always control the outcome, but you can control the process. And if you extend your time horizon to not like, I need this thing to happen right away, to, hey, this could take a decade, but I'm going to commit to seeing it through.
Yeah.
I think that when you extend that time horizon, that's where like the magic happens.
It's awesome. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate you coming on the show and on episode. Again, we don't know if it's 2 or 3.
Wow.
To be determined, but thanks for being one of my best friends, and thanks for all you do. And I think people will be encouraged today with just, what's possible. So love you. Appreciate you.
Love you, man.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. And if you like this video and want to see more like it, just hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, or you can follow me on Instagram at @JDriedger. And if you have a question, or if there's someone you would like to be featured on the show, shoot me an email at hello@helpmesee.ca. And together, let's keep challenging limiting belief systems, choosing to see possibility, and pushing past the familiar. This is the Help Me See Show. Doing good? Sam's good?
No.
No? Everyone's down, sick? Where are these lights at? So we're doing 3,200. Just trying to go with a little more of a warmer